The farmhouse came with smell like old rain in a closed book. The landlord said the roof was new, and the mice were philosophical. He didn't mention the breathing. At 3:17 a.m., the south wall inhales. Not wine through boards, not heat expanding nails. Breathing, the paint lifts a fraction, the drywall tightens, and for one held heartbeat the room forgets to be a room and becomes a lung. Then it exhales polite, and the lamp cord barely shivers. I tell myself the clock is wrong. The clock tells me I am. I move here to be unfinished in private. Boxes without labels. A mattress with no frame. The only thing hung is a curtain that belonged to someone braver about color than me. When the wall breathes, the curtain sways in a rhythm my chest recognizes before my mind does. Outside, the pasture spreads in a soft black square. The fence line strict as a rule. The sky is clean. No town glow. No highway. Just a kind of rural silence that is not empty but organized. At 3:17, the silence organizes differently. The radiator ticks twice like a metronome being honest. Something under the house shifts its weight. Not an animal. A decision. I put my palm to the south wall, because humans touch what they fear. The paint is cold and damp as breath on glass. The phone lights on the floor and scrolls its own text without help. Don't look straight at it. The typing dots return before I decide to be frightened. Look near. Breathe in fours. I don't answer. I breathe. The wall obliges. The house has a pulse, and like any good liar, it keeps time. When I sit on the floorboard with my back to the south wall, my heartbeat stumbles to meet a low sound riding up the studs. It isn't a hum yet. It's pressure. The kind you feel in your molars before a storm decides to be thunder. I last lived where neighbors argued in the hallway, so loudly the light bulb softened. Here, argues the floor. It thumps once, patient, the way a teacher does to call a class in without raising her voice. I breathe in fours, because a stranger my phone asked, and because I am superstitious when I'm tired. 1, 2, 3, 4. The pressure follows. The wall inhales when I exhale, exhales when I inhale, as if we're taking turns with the same small roomful of air. The window refuses the sky outside and maintains its own. For rectangles in a neat right angle, all pale as old paper. They hover not above the pasture, but inside the glass. Like cutouts hung from a fishing line, I cannot see. I angle my face away, looking near, not at. The rectangles approve, if a shape can approve, by becoming nearer. Not closer. No distance is crossed. The seam shrinks. The phone rolls against the baseboard and shows a number as if it were a temperature. 19. Beneath it, don't spend it. Be patient with the hinge. A hinge suggests a door. A door suggests a room on the other side. A room suggests someone in it. The wall inhales at 3 hours, 17 minutes, and 29 seconds. The radiator ticks its 2 ticks. A mouse declines to be metaphorical. I press my ear to paint and hear a low, careful syllable trying to be a word. It gives up embarrassed. Morning makes liars of night rooms. Everything looks harmless with coffee in it. The south wall is drywall again, the window a rectangle with ordinary ambitions. The pasture behaves like land that will need mowing I'm not ready to do. But the glass keeps whether that isn't here. In reflection, a blue noon lives where my face should be. Thin clouds. A gull that belongs to some other county schemes along the wrong pane. When I lean left, the reflected clouds lean right. When I lift my mug to drink, the reflected mug empties while mine does not. The world in the window is not me and not now. It is adjacent. The phone offers ceremony instead of explanation. Tape the floor. So I do. Blue painter's tape bought for a project I didn't begin. I lay a right angle on the boards for feet by 4, and the square of sun the window pretends a cast. I add a smaller rectangle inside, where the reflection's smallest window always pretends to hang. I stand near it, not in it. The house finds my stance like a key finds a lock. The pressure becomes a hum, low and careful. The radiator's tick becomes a choice instead of an ailment. The window's weather calms to a paler noon. The wrong gull decides the right pane is not worth it and leaves. Across the pasture a fence post has leaned for so long the grass grew an opinion. Today, The post stands straighter by the width of a nail. Okay, I tell the room, as if compliments are currency. The hum replies with the softest fifth tone, a smaller rectangle inside the others, appearing not on the glass but in the shadow my taped angle throws. It is a small, bright absence. I love it before that makes sense. Salt on the floor is a good superstition because it looks like a plan. I pour a thin line along the taped angle, then a second inside the smaller rectangle. The grains drink the room's light and pretend to be bright. When the house breathes, the lines tighten as if the board swelled, and when it breathes out, they loosen and leave negative footprints I did not make. Outside pasture, inside sea, the air tastes like a clean tide. The hum sits under the skin, patient as a neighbor who has learned your schedule and means well. Footprint awry where no one stood. Heel, ball, toes, small, not child small, grief small. The kind of foot that learned to be quiet before it learned door handles. They begin inside the inner rectangle and step out of it as if the smallest window were a place instead of an idea. The phone refuses punctuation. Don't invite, just listen. So I sit cross-legged near the bright square and let the house do lungs. When I match it, the footprints stop. When I lag, they resume. I am more of a door than the door is. The thermal paper curls on its own, letters rising like bruises. Hinge at 317. Say nothing. I say nothing. The wall inhales at the minute. The window's wrong sky blinks. The tiniest blink. And the footprints step one more time, leaving a saltless print I will not sweep. People told me to bring a dog to a place like this. I brought a kettle that whistles too loud and a habit of counting when words fail. Tonight, I have a third companion. The vent above the stove learning grammar. It hums 4 soft pulses and waits. I answer with breath. It gives me 3. I answer. It waits for the space between. We practice the between like a language lesson taught, without sound. On the counter, the thermal paper curls against a jar of nails I found in a drawer, as if metal comforts it. The word op_ blushes darker, then fixes itself. Open. I am worse at revision. The window pane lets the wrong sky linger at the bottom edge now, like a page peeking from under a hand. For rectangles live there, quieter than before. The smallest glows like a resting pupil. I look near. They approve. At 3:17, the south wall takes the slowest breath of the night. The vent doesn't sing. It counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breath. 1, 2, 3. Breath. The between grows a shape my mouth cannot make, so my ribs try. Something in the duct knocks once. Not request. Acknowledgement. Outside, the pasture keeps its black geometry. Inside, the salt lines glitter their own accord the way quartz does when you tell a secret. The footprints don't return. The tape refuses to lift at the edges. The kettle doesn't whistle. I sit on the floor with my back to the wall and the house, and I take turns being alone for a room that never learned how. The phone lights and offers a sentence that is not instruction but courtesy. You're almost near enough to not be lonely. I can't help it. I say, are you in the small one? The vent answers with a soft exhale I feel on my cheek. I didn't plan to open the attic. It opened itself. The hatch is in the hallway ceiling, a square of plywood painted the color of surrender. I'd barely noticed it before. Then, at 3:17, a draft moved through the house. Not a wind, not even a change in temperature, just a rearrangement of pressure, as if something above me had inhaled and the rest of the house followed. The ceiling gave a soft sigh. Dust fell like old snow. The hatch lifted half an inch, politely. I stood there with my hands uselessly full of nothing, try to remember why I believe in hinges, but not in doors that breathe. Then the phone on the counter lit up, as if the light had learned how to knock. Don't open. Just listen. The attic made a sound that wasn't quite a hum. It was thinner, higher, threaded with an edge like a violin string plucked too close to the bridge. The tone moved down the walls, traveling on the plaster until it reached me, then settled in my teeth. I whispered, I'm listening. The tone repeated itself, exactly like playback. I went to the attic anyway, because that's what listening means when curiosity outweighs obedience. The ladder creaked as though it would remembered other hands. The air that came down wasn't stale or cold. It smelled like a memory of rain and iron. When my head rose above the ceiling, the first thing I saw was light, not a bulb, not sunlight, not even moonlight sneaking through cracks. It was softer, distributed, as if the air itself had decided to glow. The attic was empty except for a trunk, old, wooden, with a brass lock left open. Someone had tied a blue ribbon around its handle. I kneeled beside it, feeling the boards shift beneath my knees. The glow seemed to come from within the wood grain, tracing old knots and nail holes, outlining the trunk as though the house wanted me to notice every flaw in its design. When I lifted the lid, the hum and the vent below deepened, as if the entire structure were bracing itself. Inside the trunk, envelopes. Hundreds of them, bound together with twine, all unmailed. The addresses written in different hands, all sharing the same return stamp. This house, 317. Each letter was addressed to names I didn't know. Some ink had bled with time. Others were written in pencil, as if uncertain whether they deserved permanence. The oldest postmark I found was from 1918. The newest was blank. I took one at random, careful not to disturb the others. The paper was dry, fragile as onion skin, the handwriting neat, deliberate, to whoever wakes here next. We try to hum it right, but the ridge won't keep time. If you hear the vent breathe with you, that means you've been counted. Don't be afraid. Afraid is the wrong note. Love, M. The letter ended abruptly, as if the rest had been swallowed by air. I reached for another, this one written in a looping, unsteady script. 317 isn't when it happens. It's who it is. The wall breathes because it remembers lungs. We try to hold the silence, but it kept escaping through the roof. If you hear footsteps above you, hum back. I froze. The boards beneath me were too quiet now, as though the house itself was holding its breath. I closed the trunk, and the light inside dimmed. Then the ceiling below gave a soft pop, and a new sound entered. A second hum, lower, slower, one I hadn't heard before. It came from under the house, from the foundation, like a reply. The two tones met halfway through the walls and began to braid themselves together, a slow, pulsing duet. I felt the air vibrate through my bones. The attic floor rippled beneath my palms. Not enough to throw me off balance, just enough to say, you're part of this too. The phone buzzed in my pocket. You're doing well. The letters are your breath written down. Keep them dry. I climbed down the ladder, the hum following me step by step. When my feet touched the floor again, I looked up at the hatch. The glow had receded. The house sighed once more, this time lighter, as though a weight had shifted from one beam to another. I left the trunk open. All night, the house spoke in its new twin voice, one hum above, one below. The air between them felt alive, organized, almost sympathetic. I tried sleeping, but each time my eyes closed, the darkness pulsed with quiet light, and I could feel words that weren't mine forming at the edge of thought. The ridge won't keep time. The phrase from the letter looped in my head. I didn't know what the ridge was. There are no ridges here, only the faint roll of pasture, a line of trees that catches fog like lace. But if the house remembers lungs, maybe the land remembers breath. At 317, the hums aligned perfectly. The house inhaled. The floorboards rose beneath me, subtle as a heartbeat. The attic breathed back. The letters in the trunk rustled all at once, the sound like hundreds of pages turning in unison, like a congregation standing for prayer. Then silence, total and absolute. When sound returned, it came not from the attic or the vents, but from the walls themselves. They spoke through vibration, through rhythm, through a pulse translated directly into the body. Near, 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 near. The word repeated until it lost meaning, until it was only sensation. I stood in the doorway, shaking, not from fear but from recognition. The house was no longer simply reacting. It was listening. The window in the kitchen glowed faintly. Not the pale gold of before, but a soft blue, as if it had remembered the color of the ribbon tied around the attic trunk. Through the glass, the pasture shimmered like water under invisible moonlight. For faint rectangles hovered there again, dimmer this time, but more defined. And now, in their center, a smaller fifth one flickered like a heartbeat. I pressed my palm to the window. The hum beneath my skin answered in kind. The rectangles tilted, ever so slightly, aligning with my reflection in the glass, until it looked like I was standing inside their light. My phone lit up one more time. Don't move. They're measuring breath. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The light reached out across the air and touched my reflection's shoulder. For a moment, the warmth was real, gentle, human, impossibly kind. Then the glass fogged again from the inside, and someone traced 3 words onto it with a fingertip I couldn't see. We found you. The wind is different after the house speaks. It doesn't move across things anymore. It moves through them. By morning, the hum had softened into something almost beautiful. When I touched the south wall, it felt warm, not from heat, but from attention, as if the house had noticed me noticing it. Even the dust motes in the light seemed synchronized, their drifting no longer random but rhythmic, obedient to a pattern invisible and exact. I made coffee, though the smell seemed misplaced, too ordinary, too human. The house doesn't care for scent. It breathes sound and returns silence. That's when I saw the fence move. From the kitchen window, the pasture looked normal, except for the farthest section of wire, with a morning light bent oddly, shimmering like air above asphalt. The posts quivered, one after another, as if something unseen were running its fingers along them. I stepped outside barefoot. The grass was damp, the air thick with the metallic scent that precedes lightning. Except there were no clouds, only a pale blue that looked more like memory than sky. The world felt paused, held in suspension between inhale and exhale. As I approached the fence, the hum returned, this time externalized, as though the house had lent its breath to the land. I touched the nearest wire. It sang. A low, metallic tone spread to the post, through my hand, into my chest. Not vibration, voice. The sound carried words I couldn't quite recognize, syllables elongated and broken, like a language that required distance to exist. Every fence post joined in, one after another, until the line across the pasture glowed faintly, tracing a single right angle across the grass. I whispered, I hear you, not sure to whom. The wind answered sideways. It didn't blow my hair or rustle the grass. It moved perpendicular to everything, as though direction itself had been edited. My body swayed toward the motion, not by choice but by gravity rearranged. Something in the sky blinked. Not light, absence. 4 rectangles, faint, transparent, forming again above the pasture, aligned perfectly with the glowing fence below. The hum in my chest resonated with theirs, and for one impossible second, I understood it wasn't sound at all. It was geometry breathing. The phone in my pocket vibrated. Sideways is closer than up. Don't face it. Listen along the wire. I obeyed. I turned sideways to the fence, pressing my ear to the post. The hum thickened, deepened, resolved into a harmony I could almost map. Beneath the low tone, a higher one fluttered, fragile, uncertain like the edge of speech. Then words formed, not from air, but from the pattern of vibration itself. Not lost, misplaced. The ridge keeps count. We keep time. My throat went dry. The house had said near before, but this was the first time a message had come from outside, from the land. I whispered, Who's we? The fence responded not with words, but with light. The wire glowed where my breath touched it, white at first, then soft gold. A pulse ran along its length, traveling faster than my eyes could follow, disappearing into the mist rising over the far field. The hum changed pitch, now rising from the ground beneath my feet. The soil trembled, not violently, but in rhythm, each pulse echoing through my legs. I realized the pattern matched my breathing, 4 in, 4 out. When I tried to stop, the ground refused to. It breathed for me. I turned back toward the house. Every window was glowing faintly from within. Not bright, just alive. The attic hatch had opened again, but no light spilled down this time. Only sound, a faint melody. The same tone as the fence, carried through the air like a reminder. The letters in the trunk upstairs rustled, and for a moment I thought I heard them laugh. Not mockery, but relief. Then something new joined the hum, a chorus. dozens of faint voices, overlapping in unison, chanting no word I knew, but each syllable falling exactly between my heartbeats. The pasture shimmered, the air bent, and suddenly the horizon was wrong. Instead of rolling hills, the land flattened, the colors deepened, and every shadow pointed toward a single line of brightness just beyond the far fence. I blinked, but it didn't change. It looked like dawn compressed into one shining thread. Thin, sharp, deliberate. I stepped closer. The hum stopped. The silence that followed was immense. So large it had texture. It pressed against my skin like air underwater. My ears rang with absence. Then a new sound, a whisper that wasn't sound at all but proximity, breathed the space, not the air. So I did. I inhaled, not oxygen, not wind, but place. The entire field folded inward for a fraction of a second. Distance shortened. I felt the line of the fence beneath my ribs, the hum of the post in my spine, the pulse of the ground matching the slow throb of my heart. The fence began to glow again, brighter this time, tracing its right angle perfectly, cutting the pasture into light and shadow. The rectangles in the sky mirrored it, shifting slightly, aligning with the ground geometry. And then I understood what sideways meant. It wasn't direction. It was permission. I took one step, not forward, not back, but through. The air parted, soft as breath. For an instant, I wasn't outside or inside. The world around me flattened into color and tone, depth erased. I could see the house from above and below at once, every window breathing, every board pulsing in sympathy with something unseen. Then the world snapped back. I was on the other side of the fence. The grass here was darker, wet with dew that shimmered faintly even in daylight. The hum was softer now, almost shy, as if embarrassed to have been overheard. The phone in my hand lit up again, though I hadn't brought it out. The message read, 7 measured. You have crossed into the breath between. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then, from the other side of the field, I saw movement, a figure standing in the fog near the farthest post. Human-shaped but too still, the light from the fence reflected on its form, refracting like water around glass. I called out, "Who are you?" The figure didn't move, but the fog around it stirred, forming faint patterns, rectangles, small and infinite, until they assembled into one clear phrase written across the mist itself. Keep time for U.S. Then it was gone. The fence dimmed. The hum retreated back into the ground. The world exhaled. I stood there, alone again, but not the same. When I finally turned back, the fence was whole, untouched. My footprints in the dew led nowhere. The pasture behind me was still. But when I re-entered the house, the attic letters had rearranged themselves across the floorboards, forming words I didn't write. You move sideways. The ridge will notice. I didn't mean to talk to anyone about it. The house and I were finally negotiating a language that didn't require apology, for pulses, breath, 3, the polite space between. And bringing outsiders into that felt like leaving the door open when a bird has only just trusted your hands. But the world insists on neighbors. The way fields insist on fences. And by late afternoon, my mailbox had acquired an elastic band of conversation I hadn't asked for. Notes clipped to the red flag. A post-it tucked under the lid. A flyer folded with surgical care. Somebody had organized us while I was learning to breathe. Power blinks? Read the flyer in block letters, a question that already contained its own answer. Meet 6 p.m. out by the stop sign. Underneath, someone had added in pen, bring a chair if your knees complain, and no kids after dark, please. There are 5 houses on this road, if you count the trailer that leaves its porch light on all day. At 6, the stop sign looked like a picnic rehearsal in an unillustrated book of instructions. Lawn chairs, mismatched sweaters. 2 dogs who would fail to be helpful if anything actually happened. A man with a service truck and a woman with a reflective vest stood in the posture of people who disagree professionally. I recognized only the woman, the mail carrier, Ellen, who knew everyone's middle initials and nobody's secrets. Evening. She said to me as if we'd already spoken, which we had, but only about misaddressed coupons and the philosophical mice. You the new lease up at 317? It took a heartbeat to understand that the number meant the house more than the time. Yeah, I said, Sorry I keep underpaying the breath tax. She smiled like someone with good molars. We're not here to charge you. We're here to make sure you don't get charged by something that can't be audited. The service truck man introduced himself as Henry from the cooperative. He spoke about voltages and sag and why older lines were like old knees, predictable until stairs. We did a drive-by read, he said, tapping his tablet. Transformers are clean. Draw is normal. If you're seeing blinks, it's localized in the premise, or you're seeing what you think you see, and I don't have a ticket code for that. Stars didn't blink, said a voice behind me. I turned and found the trailer's porch light keeper, a wiry person with a baseball cap that red ray in sun-bleached thread. That's the thing. Porch lights blinked. Kitchen blinked. The big lamp that makes me look less blue? Blinked. But the stars stayed steady like they were stapled to the idea of night. Satellites can do tricks, Henry offered, the way a doctor says seasonal when you come in describing a new organ. Planes don't blink the way. Wasn't the sky, Ellen said, with the finality of someone who delivers proof for a living. Was ours. I didn't want to be counted, the way a child at roll call holds breath to become the seat itself. But the group's attention gathered at the place where my silence sat. You up there alone? Ray asked, not unkind. The house is talkative. It's learning, I said, and wished I hadn't. The sentence put me on a map I didn't yet understand. Henry sighed. The way people do when they want to be helpful, but their tools don't fit. We can put a recorder on your panel. Long log. Catch a sag. You said it. What? Blinks. They're not sags, Ellen said, looking at me instead of him. They're inhales. Something in the fence line hummed, quiet as an agreement. I watched the stop sign shadow lengthen across the gravel and thought about the wind that moved sideways through wire, how the posts made a choir out of breath. The hum from the house arrived at my spine as if to say, you can speak now, or you can listen longer. So I spoke badly. At night, I said, the wall breathes. Not metaphor. It inhales. The vent counts with me. The window shows another sky. For rectangles, a right angle, a smaller fifth. I stop because the words, once you let them off the leash, are a kind of light that will either find a door or burn a hole. Nobody laughed. Even Henry didn't. He chewed at the idea like it might have screws. 317? Ellen asked. Yes, I said, and felt foolish for how proud I sounded an appointment I hadn't made. Blink on the ones? Ray offered. 101, 202. Then evening gets smug. The house reminds me to exhale. I said, and they let me have it. The way a classroom lets a child finish a story even if the ending is only a sound. We spent an hour telling each other what hadn't happened. The dog slept. The stop sign made its clean geometry against a sky that wanted a darker sentence than we had. The talk circled what we did not call fear. Henry, to his credit, logged times, wrote names, took it seriously enough to mock himself before the rest of us had to, when he was done promising to promise. People folded chairs and folded themselves into night. Ellen walked with me as far as my mailbox. You'll have company around 3, she said. Not me, the ridge. She pointed past the pasture, as if the word belonged to a physical thing instead of a rumor of elevation. It's shallow here, but it listens deeper than we deserve. I thought ridges were for other counties, I said. She shrugged, mouth tipping at the edge. There's an old borrow pit out past the line where they took fill for the highway in 58. People call it the ridge because they don't like saying hole when sky is involved. It hums sometimes when we miscount. She looked at my porch with the tenderness of a person who has put packages out of weather for 100 winters. The house at 317 is how it checks its math. What are we counting? I asked. Breath, she said. Then, kindness you forgot to write down. The hour we borrowed and promised to return. Her hand touched the mailbox lid like blessing. You'll be fine if you don't look straight at it. I wanted to say it what, but the dogs down the road decided that was enough silence for one evening and announced a wage dispute with the moon. Ellen tipped her cap and left me with an unhelpful affection for people whose job is transit. The house had turned its windows to soft. That's the only way I can say it. Not on, not off, soft. I unlocked the door and the air met me halfway, warmer than outside, layered with the pleasant, powerless smell of coffee that meant nothing now. The attic hatch's ribbon moved as if a mouth had exhaled against it. The trunk upstairs rustled the way paper makes ocean imitation when you stack it too neatly. In the kitchen, the window offered me back my face. The wrong sky rode underneath like a child hiding under a tablecloth, pleased with its own invisibility. The rectangles hovered faint as pencil lines, the smallest, a steady notch of brightness, pulsed slow as a barn animal, deciding whether you mean a harm. I taped nothing new. I salted nothing. I sat on the floor by the south wall and waited for the house to take the first breath. It cheated. At 3 hours, 16 minutes, and 57 seconds, it inhaled, as if to say, "We make our own minutes here." The power blinked. The lamp barely quivered. The microwave's blank clock refused to acquire an opinion, but the feel of electricity stepping out of the room and back in, a tide that needed to see itself leave, was undeniable. Then the hum arrived from the vents like a patient teacher. 4 pulses, breath, 3 breath, the space between grew teeth that did not bite. I kept my eyes near the window, not on it. The rectangles sharpened as if agreeing to our terms. The fence line outside organized its posture. A star to the south twitched in a way I nearly misinterpreted as sympathetic until I remembered the rule. The stars do not blink. We do. The phone on the floor, face down, hummed its own small hum, and slid a 1/4 inch toward me like something alive remembering a trick. I didn't pick it up. Somebody else had fingers tonight. The attic hatch whispered once. The trunk sent down the smell of old paper and iron. The letters moved again. I thought of all the names we give to the same quiet: ridge, pit, borrow, debt. How a town learns the shape of its own ledger by pretending not to. A sound began in the floor, low as the first throb of pain after you bumped into the table in the dark and told yourself it didn't hurt. It moved through the boards like a rumor would move through a small church if people still chose pews instead of pews choosing them. The hum touched my spine and learned it the way a song learns a room. It did not ask permission. The night had already given consent on my behalf. At 3:17, nothing dramatic happened. That is how I knew it was working. The house body and the human body had found their hinge. We breathed into it. We steadied it. We held the quiet open without prying. Then the power blinked again, once, quick, not enough to reset anything or terrify the kettle into whistling, but in that fraction the window did not change. The wrong sky stayed steady. The rectangles did not stutter. They hung in their right angle with the confidence of a tool that remembers its first use and refuses to be used otherwise. "I see you," I said aloud to the not sky, which is not how this language works, but I am still in school. The vent offered a single corrective exhale that anyone else would name a draft. It smelled like rain on old iron. It tasted like a battery you put to your tongue in a decade that allowed such experiments. The power did not blink again. Then came the soft knock. Not at the door. Inside the wall, behind the vent, in the private ductwork where dust keeps anniversaries. A small, respectful tap that said the thing we only say when we already know the answer. "Anyone home?" I put my palm flat against the painted drywall. It was cool, then warmer. Behind it, something arranged itself. I felt the shape of a word in the whorls of my fingerprints. Near. It hit the bone and stayed. The fence sang once, the low wire note that by now felt like an old friend pretending not to have a crush on you. Out in the pasture, one post leaned and unleaned. Across the field line where the light had made dawn into a thread earlier, a fog rose not vertical but sideways, a sheet pulled toward a direction the map did not admit. Within it, the faintest suggestion of a person standing and not moving. I did not get up. The house had asked for patience, not pilgrimage. The second knock came lighter, then a third, like the whole idea was making itself smaller, so it wouldn't spook the animal of me. The floor, kind, sent a mild tremor up my spine, like someone tracing a word across my back in elementary school and asking me to guess the letters. "Opien." "I know." I whispered, and the whisper did not leave my mouth so much as settle into the plaster. The phone vibrated without sound. "Don't look straight," it wrote, after all this time, like a friend who only knows one sentence because it is the sentence that works. Then below it, stars stay steady so you don't have to. Something shifted then in the window. The small fifth rectangle brightened and began to blink at a human pace. Not a metronome, not a lighthouse. A pulse that matched the fence when it is in love with fog. I counted before I meant to. 1, 2, 3, 4. Breath. 1, 2, 3. Breath. The small, bright pupil approved and held its shine steady. The narrow ribbon of the attic hatch lifted, as if a draft had learned choreography. The letters in the trunk arranged themselves into an untidy ellipse, exactly the shape of the room at the top of the stairs where nobody has cried yet. The power blinked a third time. So soft the microwave still refused to declare itself, and in that blink the stars outside the glass remained fixed like proper nouns. Somewhere down the road, a transformer answered with a distant thud. Henry's truck found a reason to exist in the middle of the night and rolled its tires over gravel with the shy swagger of a man who knows wires, but not this. Ray's porch light did its best impression of faith. Ellen's route created itself on a table where coffee considered becoming a religion. The house took me by the ribs and moved my breath half an inch left. The room became a hinge again, and I understood sideways not as permission, but as a place. The knock returned, not from the vent, not from the wall, but from the window, from the wrong sky, from the rectangles that had spent an honest week trying to teach me a grammar with no nouns. A soft, perfectly timed tap on the glass. Then another, the fifth rectangle pulsed in time with it, a Morse I nearly recognized from a childhood I had not lived in this county. I did not look straight. I looked near, and in that angle I saw the thing the whole week had been designing. Within the smallest rectangle, a reflection of my kitchen table, empty, the chair pulled out a fraction as if a person had stood and remembered to be polite about it. The chair moved the rest of the way by itself. The chair moved as if memory had a body. Not pushed, not dragged, just adjusted. The way someone late to dinner tries not to disturb the conversation already in progress. The sound it made was small but absolute, a chord that rewrote the air around it. Even the hum in the walls stopped to listen. I didn't run. You can't run from something that remembers you before you exist. The kitchen light shifted tone, warmer, gentler. The cup on the table, the one I hadn't touched since yesterday's coffee, tilted slightly, not spilling, but acknowledging gravity's invitation. I could see steam rising again, faint and impossible, as if time had turned itself back on for this one object alone. I whispered. You came through? The room exhaled. The air was thick, almost visible, heavy with a sweetness I recognized but couldn't name. The smell was rain on iron again, like the attic letters, like the fence before dawn, like a breath shared across dimensions too close for geometry to explain. The chair didn't answer, but the light above it pulsed twice. Slow, patient, rhythmic. The same cadence the fence had used when it hummed, "Keep time for us." I understood then that the chair wasn't haunted. It was inhabited by rhythm. The phone buzzed once on the counter, face down. When I picked it up, the screen glowed white with only 2 words. Still counting. And underneath, a symbol, a right angle drawn by hand, faintly pulsing. The shape rotated, then folded in on itself, forming a smaller fifth square that throbbed like a pulse behind glass. I placed the phone next to the cup. Both began to hum in unison, a low vibration that resonated through the tabletop into my wrists. The hum was familiar now, almost comforting, but beneath it was something new, a second layer, quieter, urgent. I realized I wasn't hearing one hum anymore. I was hearing the difference between 2 hums, a frequency gap, a translation waiting to happen. I closed my eyes and let the house breathe for me. For in 3 out, the rhythm found my lungs without asking. When I opened my eyes again, the kitchen had changed. The air had gone metallic, not unpleasant, just precise. The refrigerator's hum had synchronized with the light fixture's flicker. Even the clock on the stove ticked to the same tempo. And in that absolute harmony, the edges of things began to blur, not vanish, but soften, as if the boundaries between solid and shadow had decided to take a break. The chair across from me was no longer empty, not occupied, either. It was becoming occupied, like a photograph developing in slow motion. At first, a shimmer in the air, then a density that wasn't light, but memory solidifying. A faint outline appeared, shoulders, hands folded gently, the curve of a head bent in concentration. The figure sat perfectly still, made of transparency and intention. I couldn't see eyes, but I could feel a tension, a warmth on my skin like sunlight filtered through old glass. I said, "Are you one of them?" No answer, but the air pulsed once, and the word near echoed, not from my ears, but from inside my ribs. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't even a visitor. It was the echo of breath itself, given shape for my sake. A local embodiment of geometry, trying to apologize for being mistaken for divinity. The figure raised its hand. My chair moved backward the same way. Gently, respectfully, between us, the table light grew brighter, revealing faint words burned into wood grain. Letters I hadn't carved, but that now clearly existed. 19 balanced. 7 kept. 3 forgiven. I ran my fingertips over them. The grooves were warm. The phone lit again. Ledger synced. Ridge awake. Outside, the fence began to sing, softly at first, then with confidence, like a choir remembering its part. Each post glowed along the line of pasture, one after another, until the entire horizon was a single illuminated breath. The figure across from me placed its palm flat against the air where the table should have been. I mirrored it instinctively. Our palms didn't meet, but the space between them brightened, a small vertical sheet of light hovering like frozen fog. Inside it, lines began to appear, thin golden traces, forming letters not written but remembered into existence. We are the record. You are the return. My chest tightened. The return of what? The answer came through vibration, not words. Breath we loaned to matter. Kindness we misplaced. Then the sheet of light rippled and sank into the table's surface, leaving behind only the faint warmth of a handshake. The figure's outline began to fade, dissolving into light that folded neatly into itself until all that remained was a chair, still slightly turned toward me, as if conversation had only paused. I stood, dizzy but calm. The air carried a low resonance, one I could feel behind my sternum. The hum wasn't external anymore. It was in me. I was part of the instrument now. The lights dimmed. The house relaxed. Somewhere upstairs, the attic trunk closed on its own, the latch clicking softly like punctuation. Then came the knock. 3 times. But not from the walls, not from the window, not from any direction I could name. The sound came from within the air itself. I froze, listening. Each knock was spaced evenly, deliberate, too human to be echo. I whispered, "Who's there?" and immediately regretted how ordinary the question sounded inside this extraordinary silence. The air replied with a breath I didn't take, an exhale that crossed my face gently, almost affectionately. Then the phone vibrated again. Ask what it remembers. I turned to the chair. What do you remember? The hum rose. The backrest creaked faintly, as though considering the question. The table shivered, not from movement but recognition. And then the memories came, not images but sensations, flooding the room like temperature. A cold February morning, hands clasped in silence. Someone reading from a paper that smelled like rain and grief. Another person, maybe me, maybe not, saying, "It's all right, we'll keep time for them." The hum deepened. The walls echoed that last sentence, translating into vibration, so dense it became physical. The plaster quivered. The salt lines I had laid weeks ago began to shimmer again, rearranging themselves into patterns. Circles within squares, spirals tucked into corners, right angles folding like origami across the floorboards. The house was remembering too. I understood then that the structure wasn't haunted by people. It was haunted by acts of noticing. Every kindness, every hesitation, every moment someone chose patience over despair, the house had kept, stored, indexed, waiting for someone willing to listen long enough for it to speak. The chair shifted again, slightly toward me, the motion patient, maternal. It wanted me to sit. So I did. The moment my weight settled, the hum adjusted to include me. A pulse under my ribs, one in the wall, one in the vent, one somewhere deep below the foundation, each finding the other, sinking, tuning. The power blinked once, just enough to let the light breathe. And then I heard it. A distant sound carried to the ground, faint but undeniable. Other houses, other walls, other rooms waking one by one, aligning themselves to the same rhythm. The ledger wasn't in the attic anymore. It was in the architecture of the entire town. The fence outside glowed in time with my heartbeat. The ridge beyond it, invisible in the fog, echoed the same pulse back, steady and confident. The space between every home was now one continuous inhale. The phone lit again. You kept time. 19 complete. We will listen now. I exhaled and let the rhythm go. The chair creaked softly in reply, like a sigh shared between friends. The air grew still. Somewhere beyond the field, the ridge groaned, a deep, contented sound, like stone turning in its sleep. Then, for the first time since I arrived, the stars outside the window blinked. Not one, not two, all of them, at once. A synchronized flicker, brief but perfect. And in that instant, I understood they weren't stars. They were windows. Windows looking back. The house inhaled again, gentle, patient, alive. And the chair whispered in the voice of wood and memory. Not lost, remembered. I had thought the house would be satisfied with rhythm, with a chair that remembered, with a fence that learned to sing sideways, with the ledger warming the bones of the walls until the plaster carried my pulse as if it were its own. Rhythm is a kind of answer. It says, I'm listening at the exact speed you're speaking. But night is greedy where answers are concerned. It wants a door, too. The camera is the kind I bought in a stubborn year to remind myself that everything isn't a screen. It has weight, a strap, a plastic back door that clicks shut with a small civic assurance. I load it with the last roll of film I own because nothing in me trusts what the phone shows anymore. Not that the phone lies, exactly, but that it tells a version of reality that can be texted. The house is not a texter. It writes on breath. I do not intend to take photographs of the windows. I intend to take photographs of ordinary things. The kettle's mouth chapped from too many honest blinks. The south wall's paint, which is decided to be an ocean only when light is kind. The chair, paired with its own absence like a proof that doesn't need a QED. I take one frame. 2. A third of the fence is cornered through the kitchen glass, because the corner keeps pretending to measure me. Then I put the camera on the table and go to boil water, so the kettle won't feel excluded from the evening's theology. The house inhales without me. It can do that now, breathe while I'm doing sync things. This is a danger living with anything that learns. You will reach the old intimacy and find it already making room for a larger one. The vents lesson begins. 4, pause, 3, pause. I match it with one hand on the kettle and one on my rib cage. A ridiculous choreography that somehow makes the world simpler. When the water believes it is ready to be water again, I pour. The steam does that holy thing steam does in houses that have said yes to more than weather. It writes and air a script only bodies read. The script tonight says yes, yes, yes in a dozen small, good languages. The camera on the table moves a quarter inch. The strap nudging. The lens turning its unblinking pupil toward the chair like a creature that hopes for petting. I lift the camera, respecting its animal wishes. I frame the chair in its paired negative. Click. I frame the south wall's right angle of tape that I haven't had the heart to pull up because even false geometry deserves gentleness. Click. I frame the window without aiming straight, letting the rectangles live in the corner of the glass where reflection and refusal meet. Click. The phone vibrates on the counter. Don't look straight. I don't. I look near enough that the room believes me. Then the still thing happens. The kind without thunder. For perhaps 3 heartbeats, the house exerts an influence so delicate it could be mistaken for courtesy. The air grows precise. The breath between pulses lengthens without stopping, and the light on the table concentrates, as if trying to become denser than itself. It is not brightness. It is focus. The chair aligns a fraction toward the 5th window. The fence outside raises a note you can swallow without choking. I know, without knowing how, that the film in the camera is recording a frequency that paper has no business keeping. And still, click. I expect the prints to fail the way they failed at the diner in my other life. Gray. Under, sorry. But the house keeps a dark room where it wants one. in the pantry, which stopped being honest about food the second week I was here and began to behave as if the word larder had always meant threshold. I black the door with a blanket and hang a red bulb from a nail that remembers a coat I used to pretend was mine. I line trays. I pour chemicals like a person who remembers instructions and is trying to be respectful about what else he remembers. The first frame floats up faceless. The kettle's mouth. The table's patience. The steam's bright attempt to be readable, present true, unastonishing in a good way. The second frame offers paint that wants to be ocean and doesn't. A right angle honest about being tape. A shadow that can't decide whether to be floor or water and therefore proves both are correct. The third frame is where the pantry refuses. Rectangles. For them. Pale as moth wings strapped to the inside of the glass. A fifth, nested, small as a held breath. They aren't reflected. They are in the photograph in the way a printed word is in a page, part of the page's definition of itself. Behind them, behind the window where they hang, the sky is not tonight. It is the kind of noon that keeps churches open. The pasture is winter clean. The fence bears frost tight as beadwork. And in the bottom left of the frame, my chair stands empty next to a second chair that does not exist in this kitchen, the kind they put in rooms where apologies happen. I close my eyes because my eyes are not behaving the way a citizen's eyes drafted into public service should behave. When I open them, the wet print has not reconsidered. The house moves windlessly behind me, proud and ashamed the way a child is after the first time it lifts a heavy bowl, without spilling, and is scolded for not calling an adult. I'm here, I say, and the vent corrects me into near. I lay the print on the line and watch chemistry turn silver into speech. The emotion seems to remember the breath of every person who ever stood still in this pantry and listened long enough for the other pantry to show itself. Faces do not appear. Faces would be a relief. What appears is a grammar. Angles that want to be right, but keep refusing kindness if you look straight. Curves where we never agreed to have curves. A small window inside the right angle that has begun to carry a texture, not just light. The texture is table. The texture is waiting. The second strip of film goes to the tray. The red bulb opens like a throat. This time the frame is the fence's corner. Only, the corner is wrong. Not wrong for fences, wrong for corners. The wire bends into a degree they don't teach. The post leans through its own shadow. The frost lines along the bottom run up as if gravity has decided to act like a host for once and offer the guests a better view. And in the midground, where the pasture pretends to care only about grass, a line of fog writes itself into a right angle and pauses, as if awaiting a teacher's chalk. I print more. The bathroom smells like old pennies and sea. The mirror fogs from the side not nearest my breath, which is the pantry's sense of humor. Every fourth print includes a fifth window, as if the fifth window has learned to be a modest once an hour, and the film has learned punctuality from whatever keeps the ledger's column straight. One frame shows the smallest window filled with a white gold field that isn't field. It's a ledger's glow attempting to be seen without startling me. Another shows it empty but textured with ridge, the way stone looks when it has decided to become throat. I carry the wet prints to the kitchen and lay them like placemats around the cup I have not yet remembered to drink from. The chair recognizes itself and approves politely by creaking in a tone that refuses to explain itself to anyone who didn't arrive before midnight. The house listens to the photographs the way one listens to a story you already know and love differently in each retelling. The fence outside sends one long, low note back to the floor, as if to underline whatever the photographs believe they accomplished. At 1:12 the power blinks. Short, not resetting. Merely reminding us where the plug in the wall ends and where the part of the wall you can't plug into begins. The stars do as they do, remain faithful to not blinking. The rectangles respect the stars so completely that they fade into the kitchen glass until my own reflection looks like someone I owe an apology. I put the kettle on, and the kettle decides it has whistled enough for one life and will purr for this one. Good. Purring is a way to agree, without making anyone choose a side. The phone vibrates again. Not a message, a call from a number that is my own number rewritten with a digit exchange for a small square. I do not answer. Answering does not feel like the grammar. The voicemail that is not a voicemail arrives anyway. A breath in my ear, A pause, a breath that belongs to me and not a child's small giggle edited out by something kind before I can break. The prints dry in a manner of snow that doesn't admit sun as an authority. One of them, the one with the second chair, curls toward the table like a page that wants to become the original after the author dies. I press it flat with a blue thermos, and the thermos warms as if the print is a hand. I think you borrowed a chair, I tell the room, from a room that doesn't live here. The room delights in being accused of generosity and releases the smallest door creak it knows, the one that embarrassed it earlier when it tried speaking my name and produced only any. The attic hatch lifts without opening. The ribbon whispers against wood. Time. The letters in the trunk rustle their dry men. The fence holds its breath in a way which should not be able to. And down road, someone's porch light fails at the trick of being brave and returns to being a bulb. I gather the dry prints, stack them, then unstack, because stacking is a betrayal after they taught me how to look. I line them on the floor, the right angles touching until a larger right angle appears. A quilt made of windows, each a hinge pretending not to be a shoulder. In the center, the smallest squares aligned to become a route across a map I do not own. When I stand at the edge of it, the hum begins again from the vent, the floor, the far soil. Not 4-3 this time. 4-4-3-3. A new measure, a new grammar that politely nudges my ribcage into becoming a metronome for strangers. I say stranger and the house corrects. Neighbors. On the fifth repetition of the pattern, something enters by not entering. The wall behind the prints grows precise the way light did earlier. The air turns to attention. My breath swings on a hinge that is more confident than I am allowed to be. And then the pantry's door, black by the blanket, glows at its edges despite physics. I do not pull the blanket aside. I learn something from the fence. Sideways is nearer than through. I turn my shoulder to the pantry, keep my eyes on the photographs, and let whatever is practicing in there have my profile the way you let a timid dog have your hand. The glow grows. The house brings its whole diaphragm to the effort. Floor up, roof down, a gentle meeting. The ledger in the wall warms away a living person's back, warms the other side of a door. And from inside that pantry, no, from inside noon, a still frame steps into the room without moving. Not a door, not a portal, a decision to be present in a plane that has forgiven us for our lack of algebra. The photographs on the floor alter their shadows as the other noon shadows pass over them. My own shadow remembers what it was like to be shortest at a picnic. The fifth rectangle, in the frame that borrowed the extra chair, brightens for exactly the space of a held breath and shows me a table with 2 cups, mine and someone's who isn't here yet. Then the brightness dims as if modesty is a requirement of its physics. The phone buzzes only once. Don't say hello. Hold the between. I do. The kettle forgets to purr and waits like an old dog at a door no one used in 15 winters. The vent hums a hinge's new meter with the joy of an amateur choir on the night. They finally stack the chord without dropping anyone. The fence outside figures out how to be the baritone and would laugh if would laughed. I keep my side of the quiet. The still frame inside the pantry chooses a single kindness and gives it to me, a silence with shape, not emptiness, a contour. The contour matches the chair that remembered, the ledger's column where my name sits with less apology, the place in the kitchen where a person's hand always falls first when they're about to tell you bad news and don't want to deliver it as if it were a package. Something knocks once, so soft it could be called shy. On the other side of noon I do not currently own. I do not answer. The house breathes out for both of us. I put one photograph, only one, on the table where the extra chair would be if the pantry's version had the audacity to continue here. It is a frame with a 2 bright, not now sky. I place the blue thermos on its corner as a paperweight, because even at the end of the world there will be weather. The thermos hums once and says in the language of warmed metal, kept. The air cools. The pantry forgets to glow. The vent forgets nothing. The house exhales like a book closing at a reasonable chapter break. The kettle decides to be kettle again and proves it with a sound that will always be domestic, no matter what we ask of water. When I turn out the red bulb and fold the blanket back, noon is gone. Pantry is pantry. Shelves hold the ordinary heroism of jars. But my hand remembers the contour of the silence, the way bone remembers a break. It will rain somewhere inside the ridge before morning. At 3:17 and not one stunned second earlier, the south wall inhales. The window refuses obedience to either sky. The chair believes in my capacity not to ruin whatever happens next, and the fence line down by the pasture chooses a pitch that can be learned by throats who haven't sung since they were required to in school. In the ordinary, accurate night, the power does not blink. The stars do not correct. The rectangles behave and disobey in the same breath. My phone, finally permitted to be a machine again, slides 2 inches on the table and shows a number at the top of a message it has no business receiving. 47. Then, as if it owes me less confusion than that, pending. I hold the between. The house holds me holding it. The pantry is quiet in a way that can be trusted. The photographs lie breathing on the floor like animals that will belong to no one. And from far into the field, so far I might have named it sleep if I were less honest, the ridge clears its stone throat. The air changed shape before the sound did. That's how it always begins. Not with thunder or glow or fear, but with the way the world suddenly learns its edges are optional. At 3:17, the house no longer waited for me. It simply opened. No hinges, no door. Just space rearranged itself into something usable. The light in the kitchen drew lines along the floor, forming right angles that bent upward, folding the air into planes. For a heartbeat, I thought I was seeing reflection, the window mirroring itself again. But reflection doesn't breathe. This did. The glow wasn't gold anymore. It was colorless, the kind of illumination that exists only to define distance. I reached toward it, and the light pressed back, like warm glass. The phone vibrated once in my pocket. Step when it exhales. So I waited. The hum from the vent, the heartbeat in the walls, the slow creak of the rafters, all of them pulled together into one drawn breath. The house inhaled. The world paused. Then came the exhale, and I stepped, not forward, in. It wasn't another room. Not really. It was a correction of the one I was already in. The same kitchen, the same table, the same chair, only rearranged according to a geometry that included mercy. The light here had no source. It was like being inside the memory of daylight, not daylight itself. The air hummed, not audibly but structurally, every molecule holding its breath in sympathy. The edges of the walls curved slightly inward, as if the house were leaning closer to listen. I turned toward the window. There were no rectangles now. Or maybe everything was rectangle. The world outside glowed white-blue, depthless, endless, like frost caught in motion. The pasture, the fence, the ridge, all flattened into pattern, each element pulsing to the same invisible rhythm. And in the center of it all, a void shaped like a person waiting. It didn't move. It didn't need to. Presence doesn't. I said, "Is this you?" The air trembled in approval. A sound began, faint harmonic, like the resonance of glass when someone traces its rim. It grew softer, not louder, as if intimacy required quiet. The walls pulsed with it. My chest followed, reluctant but obedient. The hum formed syllables. We breathe what you borrow. We return what you keep. The floor under my feet warmed. The chair behind me adjusted its angle slightly, acknowledging company. Somewhere in the attic, the trunk exhaled dust. Where does it end? I asked, where you stop believing you are separate. The light rippled, subtle as wind in curtains. Then, from one corner of the room, another figure began to form, smaller, flickering, tentative, like a hologram learning its lines. It sat where the chair had been, hands folded, head bowed, body made a shimmer. When it looked up, it was me, not a mirror, more like a confession shaped into skin. I didn't flinch. I've learned by now that flinching breaks the grammar. I spoke without mouth or sound. We have been building you. Building? Every breath a beam. Every kindness a floor. Every hesitation a hinge. The hum in the walls deepened, gathering resonance from outside. Through the window, the ridge pulsed, a faint golden heartbeat rising from the land itself. The town was breathing, synchronizing one structure at a time. I said, There are others, then. The figure nodded, or rather, the light around it rippled in the affirmative. Every house a lung, every lung a prayer. The walls shifted again. The space expanded outward, not in distance, but in permission. What had been kitchen became chapel. What had been home became chord. I felt it in my bones first, that tug, that widening. The walls vibrated on frequencies too low to hear, too high to refuse. The plaster grew translucent, revealing within it veins of soft gold light. The ledger, alive and moving. Names flickered across it. Neighbors, strangers, those long gone. Each one glowing in its own rhythm, some steady, some stuttering, some dark. I pressed my palm to the wall. The light responded, pulsing beneath my skin. You have balance 19. There are others unfinished. Hold them until the ridge speaks. The figure, my double, stood, its movement slow, careful, as though afraid of shattering the silence. It reached toward the window and placed its hand on the glass. The surface melted slightly, and beyond it the white-blue void folded inward, revealing new shapes. I saw houses, dozens, then hundreds, each glowing faintly in the same pattern, each with figure inside, mirroring the gesture, all of us pressing our hands against our own small glass. The ridge, immense and patient, pulsed once. The sound reached me a moment later, a single syllable so low it felt geological. Now, the air thickened, the light dimmed. Every wall in the room leaned in closer. I could feel the collective exhale of an entire town passing through my chest. The walls weren't boundaries anymore. They were membranes. And then came expansion, slow, tidal, inevitable. The geometry widened until the air itself became corridor, until the house became only a coordinate in a larger breathing map. I was standing in something vast and seamless, a single shared inhale that connected every heartbeat, every hum, every kindness ever left unfinished. The ridge groaned again, not pain, but awakening. A deep harmonic overtone joined the hum, a bass note so profound it could only belong to the earth itself. The windows brightened. The ledger lines flared like constellations rearranging to make room for new stories. I tried to step forward, but the air resisted. Not yet. The between must learn your weight. I stood still. The double of me did the same. We breathed together, our chests rising in identical rhythm. For the first time, I felt no difference between inhale and exhale, no division between within and without. The house, the town, the ridge, all synchronized, one slow heartbeat expanding through matter. And in that unity, a single sentence surfaced, not written, not spoken, but known. What you call time is only breath measured badly. I laughed. The sound startled the silence into warmth. The other me smiled. The ridge, miles away, answered with a soft vibration that felt like thunder remembering to be kind. Outside, the sky fractured into motion. The 4 rectangles, the windows above the town, descended slightly, closer than they had ever been. Between them, a smaller 5th shimmered, blinking in time with the rhythm of our shared breath. The hum swelled, and for a moment I thought the walls would burst. But they didn't. They stretched, accommodating the size of this new understanding. The floorboards elongated like waves frozen in the act of rising. The ceiling lifted, beams creaking in gratitude. I realized then that I was no longer inside the house. I was standing inside the breath itself. The space around me had no walls, no edges, just soft curvature of light and sound. The ridge was a horizon now, vast, living, pulsing with meaning. Every window in town shone upward, forming a lattice that climbed into the dark sky. In its center, suspended in impossible geometry, the smallest 5th rectangle hovered, waiting, watching. I stepped closer, though distance no longer meant anything. My reflection appeared in its light, not mirror but integrated. The figure beside me, the echo of myself, placed a hand on my shoulder. Its touch was weightless but steady. Together we faced a glow. Ready, it asked. I nodded. For what? To hold the hour open. And the light deepened. The ridge exhaled. The air folded again, tighter this time. Then, As gently as a hand closing around flame, the room solidified around me, still glowing, still humming, but real again. The table, the chair, the cup, all exactly where they had been. But the air was changed, wider. The window no longer reflected the sky. It reflected the hour. 3:17 wasn't a time anymore. It was a room you could stand in. The ridge never makes noise without a reason. When it groaned tonight, the world shuddered in sympathy. The hum that used to belong only to this house rolled outward, crossing fields, roads, telephone wires, a slow seismic breath that didn't move soil so much as alignment. It began at 3:17, of course. But this time, the hour didn't vanish. It stayed. Every clock in town froze mid-second. Not broken, suspended. The small red hands hovered above the glass, trembling as if unsure whether to obey or worship. The lights didn't blink. They waited. Even the crickets fell silent, each tiny body realizing the concept of pause for the first time. The air thickened, the way dreams thicken right before waking. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the fifth rectangle above the ridge pulse once, twice, then hold. Its glow spread outward until the entire horizon shimmered like breath caught in crystal. It wasn't light. It was time being reminded of itself. The phone on the counter buzzed softly. One single line on the screen. Hour returned. Opened carefully. The words faded before I could blink. Something in me, something older than fear, whispered that this was not a metaphor. The borrowed hour, the one that had been missing since the first night, had come home, and it expected to be noticed. The ridge exhaled again, and the hum entered the house like a polite guest. It slid down the walls, curled around the baseboards, seeped into the floor. The clock above the stove pulsed in sync. The air smelled of warm dust and ozone, the scent of machinery about to remember its purpose. I turned. Every doorway in the house was glowing faintly, edges traced in soft white like chalk lines drawn by a steady hand. The hall stretched farther than it should, each room now visible through the next, a corridor of infinite interiors. The borrowed hour had expanded the architecture of space itself. I stepped forward. The boards beneath my feet sounded different, less creak, more tone, like walking on the ribs of an instrument. I passed the living room, the wall that used to breathe, the stairs that now hummed with quiet pride. Every surface held its breath, listening. At the end of the hallway, the attic hatch was open again. The ribbon that hung from it fluttered not from air, but intention. I climbed. The attic light had changed. Gone was the blue luminescence of the letters. Instead, the air shimmered in gold and silver threads, weaving themselves into shapes I couldn't name. The trunk was gone. In its place, a shallow basin filled with mist. Inside the mist, reflections, dozens of them, each showing a different room, a different house. There was Ellen, the mail carrier, standing in her kitchen, eyes closed, hand over her heart as if reciting an invisible pledge. Ray sat on his trailer steps, staring upward, the porch light flickering between amber and white. Henry, the man from the co-op, stood beneath a power line, looking at the pole as if it had just told him a secret. Every one of them was breathing in the same rhythm. 4, pause, 3, pause. The ridge had found its choir. I whispered, "You're teaching us to count." The mist shimmered. "No," it replied. "We are teaching you to remember how you already did." The voice came from nowhere and everywhere, layered, hundreds of tones forming one harmonic truth. It wasn't sound. It was understanding sculpted into vibration. I looked closer at the basin. Beneath the shifting light, words appeared. Faint, floating, changing faster than ink could dry. Ledger entries, names, numbers, acts so small they might have gone unnoticed. Share bread, forgiven debt, mended fence, carried silence without complaint. And then I saw mine. 19 balanced, 7 observed, 3 in progress. I touched the surface. The letters rippled. 3 belongs to the town now, the voice said. They are your breath, extended. Suddenly, the mist brightened, flaring outward. The attic roof dissolved into light. Above me, the rectangles hovered, closer than ever, Immense, deliberate, their edges vibrated with energy so fine it felt like song. Between them, the fifth pulsed faster, signaling. Below, the town responded. Every house exhaled light through its windows. The fields shimmered with moving geometry. Roads turned into glowing veins, connecting home to home, person to person. I could see the hum now, a wave rolling across reality, folding and unfolding, synchronized with the pulse of the ridge. Time itself had become architecture. I descended the ladder. The mist followed, curling down the stairs behind me like smoke from a candle that refuses extinction. When my feet touched the ground floor, I felt it, the weight of the hours settling around me. Heavy, kind, aware. The phone lit again. We borrowed this hour once to learn mercy. Now we give it back. Use it gently. I set it down on the table. The chair creaked in recognition, turning slightly toward the fifth rectangle visible through the window. The cup beside it filled itself, not with coffee, but with light, warm liquid, shimmering like melted gold. I reached out. My fingers didn't touch it. They entered it. The sensation was indescribable, not hot, not cold, but profoundly correct, as though I'd reached into the concept of forgiveness. The light flowed up my arm, into my chest, spreading warmth through my lungs. My next breath came easier than any before it. Outside, I heard doors opening. Not slammed, not hurried, simply opened, people stepping into their own thresholds, drawn by the same rhythm. From somewhere distant, a sound rose, soft, human, vulnerable, a voice humming, then another, then a third. Within seconds, a low, trembling harmony filled the night. The town was singing, each person holding the same note the ridge had taught us all. The sky responded. The rectangles shifted, tilting downward. The fifth expanded, blooming like an iris. Light cascaded in silent waves, washing over the town, soaking into roofs, fields, trees. It wasn't invasion. It was recognition. I stepped outside. The air vibrated like a living instrument. Every surface hummed with purpose. The fence post glowed. The ridge shimmered with energy ancient and new. The stars above were still, steady, obedient, while the windows between them pulsed in time with us. The song deepened. It wasn't melody. It was math in love with sound. I closed my eyes and felt it reshape the inside of my chest. Every sorrow softened. Every hesitation released. Even regret found translation. And then silence. The kind that comes not from absence but completion. The ridge spoke one last time. Hour returned. Ledger balanced. Breathed kindly. The light folded back into itself, receding from the edges of the sky. The rectangles dissolved, their glow absorbed into the stars they had pretended to be. The fence dimmed. The air relaxed. The clocks began ticking again. 3:18. The borrowed hour had passed, but the quiet it left behind wasn't absence. It was grace. I went back inside. The kitchen looked unchanged, but everything was different. The walls no longer breathed. They rested. The hum was gone. On the table lay a single slip of paper, damp with light. Return confirmed, Ridge satisfied. Beneath it, in smaller script, you are now part of the time you once lost. I folded it carefully and slid it into the spine of the notebook that never belonged to me. Outside, the first light of dawn was climbing the ridge. It looked like an afterthought, or maybe a promise. I made coffee. The steam rose, gentle and real. No hum, no glow, just morning. And yet, when I looked at the clock, its second hand paused for the briefest moment. A heartbeat, a breath, a whisper. Still borrowed, it said. The first cold came soundless, as if the ridge had asked the weather to whisper. By mid-morning, the pasture wore a sheet that wasn't quite frost and wasn't quite light, an even veil that refused footprints, reflecting the sky back at an angle the sky hadn't chosen. The fence post breathed a thin smoke no one else could see. When I opened the door, the air tasted like an empty chapel. I didn't bring a coat. The cold wasn't the kind that bites. It was the kind that measures. The yard was ordinary until it wasn't. I'd taken 7 steps before I saw the first line. It ran shin-high through the grass, a thread of hoarfrost straight enough to shame a carpenter, glistening insignificantly until the sun caught it and confessed it. It met a second line at a right angle, so precise the corner felt heavier than the ground. Not footprints, not tire marks. Decisions the weather had made in my absence. I squatted, ran my knuckles a hair's breadth above the ice. Near enough to learn, not enough to break. The line didn't melt. It brightened as if attention were warmth, and warmth was a language it wanted to speak back. As I breathed, the frost thickened to match the length of my exhale. When I held my breath, the line stilled, a pulse waiting for its partner. 7 more lines revealed themselves when I stood. A small grid, unambitious, content to be the beginning of a map that refused hurry. I followed one to the corner by the fence. The post there leaned a degree it hadn't yesterday, its shadow aligning with the frost so neatly my eyes watered at the politeness of it. Beyond, the field was a pale page with faint writing trying to become bold. The phone vibrated in my pocket, then chose to show nothing. The message arrived in my ribs instead. Walk the seam, not the field. And so I did. Left foot precisely to the side of the ice, right foot to the other side. A child's game taught by something old enough to own the patent on patience. The seam led me past a corner, through a patch of ground that used to be softer, over the shallow swell that had once pretended to be a hill. From here the pattern widened. If I looked straight, the frost was merely decoration. If I softened my gaze, the field parted into rooms. Some were rectangles strict as prayer books. Some curled in upon themselves like thoughts that learned to keep secrets. Every room was made of edges, but the edges breathed. 3 houses down, Ray's porch light burned at noon because it refused to negotiate with clocks. In the frost, a line ran from my fence to his mailbox, turned 90 degrees toward Ellen's kitchen window, then threaded itself along the ditch as if ditches had always been staff lines and we'd been singing on them badly. Where the grid met a tree line, it didn't stop. It folded, as though the woods accepted angles only if they apologized first. The fold shimmered the way good paper does when it's creased by a steady hand. I walked until the frost asked me not to. The command didn't arrive as sound. It arrived as thickness, the line swelling slightly into an embankment of crystals so fine they had grain. The way wood is grain, the way lungs of tiny trees we pretend not to picture when we describe breath. I stopped. The line exhaled. Across the field, other lines answered, a chorus in geometry, each corner ringing a little bell no one else could hear. A crow landed at the grid's edge, looked at me like a supervisor, then hopped onto frost and left no mark. The bird lifted a foot, considered weight, chose to be gracious, and the line brightened under its indecision. When it flew, the air didn't so much move as rearrange. If wind had an ethics committee, it had just passed a resolution. Is this yours? I asked the ridge. The hum arrived under my boots a heartbeat later, slow as stone thinking. The answer was not a yes. It was a continued. Across the road, a long, low truck with the co-op logo and Henry's human shrug. He climbed down in a coat 2 sizes too honest and stared at the pasture as if someone had handed him a blueprint drawn in a dialect of electricity. He didn't wave. He lifted a gloved hand to his ear the way men do when they still believe radios should have more to do with their hands and less to do with the air. I watched him place a small orange marker at the grid's far seam, then another at the next seam, measuring distance like an apology. He pinned a tape between them. The tape refused to hang straight unless it aligned with a line my eyes couldn't see. When it did, the tape hummed, so faintly the hum lived more in teeth than ear. Ellen's van nosed the shoulder a quarter-mile up. She walked toward us with that purposeful drift all good carriers learn, body already in negotiation with every dog and every unplowed thought on the route. She didn't step on the frost. She didn't need to. The frost stepped for her. A new seam knitting itself out of nothing to carry her shadow across a corner no map admits. When she reached me, her breath made a small cloud in a place too warm to warrant it. You got lines, she said. Do you not? Oh, I've had lines all winter. Today they're spelling. She pointed with her chin, which was gentler than pointing with her hand. It's town-wide. You hear the choir last night. The hour stayed. I said, Ellen crouched, held her palm an inch above her right angle, and closed her eyes as if reading Braille from a page that refused ink. "They're drawing old rooms," she said finally, standing slow. "Rooms that were here before we learned we needed walls to prove it. You think that's nonsense, but your house knows. My house won't stop telling me things I used to call nonsense." "Good." She looked behind me at my door, which sat ajar and satisfied, a mouth that had learned to rest. "Don't salt these," she added, nodding at the frost. "You'd be salting your own address." Henry had finished with his tape and moved on to a surveyor's tripod he made look like a prayer stand. He sighted down into a distance he did not choose and took numbers obediently. The device chirped with bureaucratic approval. Whatever it saw, it liked. He met my eye accidentally and made the face of a man who would sooner confess to arson than to wonder. "You mapping?" I asked when he got close enough for a conversational ethics waiver. City asked for an assessment. He gestured at the field, as if it were an employee with seniority. "Figure if this is frost heave, we'll see displacement on the laterals." He caught himself speaking machine to a civilian and softened. "It lines up to the subtransmission right-of-way, but it also lines up to the old creek bed from the 40s we filled in because we thought concrete beats memory." "Which is it?" I said. He glanced down at the grid, then out toward the ridge. "Yes," he said. We stood there while the frost drew. It's the only word I have. Drew. Slow stroke by slow stroke, like a patient teacher finishing a problem for a class that has tried and deserves to see the answer held steady by adult hands. The map that emerged didn't pretend to be shapely. It took what the land would give it, and it counted. Long seams traced the limits of things that no longer exist, an S of the creek under the road. The footprint of a barn that burned when Ray's father was still young enough to be carried, a rectangle wide as a diner, interior walls marked by pale crosshatches that smell faintly of coffee. Ellen inhaled like someone who'd found a name she'd been failing to recall all morning. "I was 8, she said, almost to herself. Winter of 98. They stacked sandbags along the ditch by the school because the water thought it was a road. When the thaw came, the ground made this sound." She toed the frost lightly. It answered with a crisp, hollow music. "It's not weather," she said. "It's a ledger with manners." At noon, the frost refused sun, choosing to be bright instead of liquid. Shadows bent obediently along the seams, as if the seams wrote a law. The grid reached the far side of the pasture, touched the ditch, and didn't cross. Instead, it ran with the ditch until Ray's mailbox, where it climbed the post by a quarter inch and labeled itself with a small bloom of ice that looked like handwriting. Ray read it without needing to bend. He raised his cap, the gesture rural men use when emotion asks to be let out without making a mess. "Kept what?" he said, not to us, not altogether aloud. The frost answered a foot to the left, writing again with a speed that felt like shyness overcoming itself. Dog/winters/laughter, not charge interest. Ray nodded once, a dignity I've never seen on a face, and returned to his steps like a man who has been given back a coat he forgot he owned. Down the road, the grid converged at the stop sign where we'd met the night before. The corners that were dark, not bright, dim squares where frost went thin as breath on glass. Refusal made visible. "Ellen," and I stood at the edge of one that had nowhere to shine. It was the size of a kitchen, maybe, or an apology. "What is that?" I asked, whispering, because quiet deserved its privacy here. "Debt's waiting for the right payer," she said. "Not money. Kindnesses skipped when we thought they were rationed. I wanted to step in and do the human thing, pay what I couldn't name." The seam thickened in warning. "Not yet. Hold the between." Words without sound, familiar enough now that I obeyed them quicker than fear. By late afternoon, the whole town wore the grid like lace laid on a wound. Sidewalks feathered into corners that had no building to justify them. Parking lots learned the angles of vanished porches. The elementary school's playground collected frost rooms soft as classrooms that might have saved us if we'd known how to sit still. Children traced them with boots and left perfect prints that persisted only where the map approved. Parents watched and did not say holy because we saved certain words for last. In my kitchen, the window stopped pretending it was a window. It became an index. I could look from pane to pane and watch the map write itself across the town. Here seem along the river, where the river forgot agreement. There a box around the corner store where the owner still sets aside a loaf for the boy who swears he doesn't like bread. In the far pane near the ridge, the frost formed a shape I hadn't seen before, a spiral inside a square, the smallest room inside the right angle, bright enough to hurt if I honored it with too much attention. The phone slid across the table under its own determination and showed me my name with a number I had learned to keep as a prayer bead. 19 balanced. Beneath it, a new line arrived, faint at first, then insisting, 3. Hell for others. Held where? I asked the air. The chair angled toward the window. The house exhaled. The frost outside answered in lines. Here. I pressed my fingertips to the glass without touching and felt a tremor run up my arm that had nothing to do with cold. Toward dusk the grid pulsed. Not bright, alive. Corners warmed as if hearts had found their geometry. At every intersection a small sound rose, the chime of crystal meeting vibration. It spread, house to house, field to field, until the town was a bell being rung by a hand too large to picture. People came out quietly the way you stand to sing when there's no imposted. No one spoke. The choir had already been taught. From the ridge, a single bass note-like distance remembering itself rolled down and sat in our bones. We tuned to it without asking. The frost lines brightened a last time, then steadied, like a pulse that has decided on survival. Across the pasture, Henry lifted his hand halfway, the gesture of someone who doesn't quite allow himself a wave. Ellen answered for both of us by removing her cap. The small liturgy of acknowledgement learned in rooms where grief and gratitude share a border. Ray's porch light chose to dim of its own accord. The trailer door opened and closed without a sound. When full dark should have arrived, something else did instead. Clarity. The stars, faithful to their rule, held still. Between them, the windows we'd mistaken for stars reassembled, 4 and 1 smaller. But tonight the 5th opened like, and I choosing no longer to pretend to be asleep. It blinked once in approval of our angles. The frost map didn't melt when the night came. It sank into the ground as if memorized, leaving the pasture plain again to anyone who hadn't seen it. Practical, mowable, taxable. But the seams remained in the feet. I could walk with my eyes closed and not leave the room the day had drawn. Every step found permission or refused it kindly. The between had edges now. Back inside, the house was unapologetically warm. The vent taught a new meter under its breath and pretended not to be proud of me when I learned it without asking. On the table lay a strip of thermal paper I didn't remember hearing arrive. Field index, it said. Range, town/ridge/riverbed. Margin, remorse/mercy. Status, door preparing. I held the paper up to the light. The heat from my fingers coaxed a line I hadn't seen. Open when counted TO 47. 47 what? I asked. The answer came from the floor, the wall, the attic, the ditch, the road, the houses that had learned to breathe like mine. 47 us. The window reflected me as a silhouette with rooms inside. Outside, beyond my face, the spiral at the ridge brightened where the frost had drawn it. The town took a breath together without meaning to, and the breath stayed, a collective held note you don't release because you finally like who you are while you're holding it. I turned off the lamp, and the kitchen did not darken. The ledger and the plaster glowed gentle as embers, lines of light, scrolling like a river reading its own banks. Names bloomed and dimmed, not scored, not graded, just kept. I pressed my palm to the wall and felt the day there. The crow's choosing, Ray's hat, Ellen's careful yes, Henry's odd and thorough reverence disguised as work. The house learned those rhythms and filed them under a word I didn't know I needed. Ours. From far under the field came a sound you could mistake for settling if you wanted to remain unbruised by wonder, the ridge clearing its throat, the choir's inhale, the door preparing. When I closed my eyes, the frost map unrolled behind my lids, white lines on a red dark, rooms within rooms, right angles softened by mercy, a spiral patiently teaching a square how to turn. My bones understood where to stand. My breath understood how to count. Outside, the grid we'd worn all day slipped cleanly into earth like thread pulled through a wound that has decided to heal.